What if the strongest thing you ever did was the one nobody noticed? Not because it was loud or unforgettable, but because it looked like you did nothing at all. Your soulmate has just uncovered a truth that has left them questioning every conclusion they ever reached about your connection. For years, they believed they understood why you stayed silent when everything between you was falling apart. They thought your silence meant you had accepted the distance, stopped believing in the relationship, or simply didn't care enough to fight for it. That belief became the foundation of every memory they carried. But now, something has changed. A truth they never expected has come into the light, and it has completely transformed the way they see your heart. They have finally discovered that your silence was never an act of surrender. It was one of the hardest decisions you ever made. Stay with me until the very end, because once your soulmate understands what truly kept you silent, they realize they have misunderstood one of the most important chapters of your story. The realization did not arrive through a dramatic confrontation or a long-awaited conversation. Instead, it came quietly, almost unexpectedly, forcing your soulmate to revisit memories they believed had already revealed everything they needed to know. As they reflected on those moments, they began noticing details that had escaped them before. They remembered the times when you could have defended yourself, but chose not to. They remembered moments when you had every opportunity to argue, explain, or prove your side, yet instead you stepped back with remarkable restraint. At the time, they interpreted that choice as emotional distance. Now they see it differently. They understand that remaining silent often requires far more courage than raising your voice. Anyone can react in the heat of emotion, but choosing peace when your heart is hurting demands a level of strength that few people ever recognize. That realization alone was enough to leave them speechless, because it challenged everything they had believed about your intentions. As these thoughts continued unfolding, another question quietly settled into their heart. If your silence was not a sign that you had stopped caring, then what was it protecting? The more they searched for the answer, the more they realized your silence had never been about avoiding conflict. It had been about protecting something greater than winning an argument. It was protecting respect when emotions threatened to destroy it. It was protecting love from becoming bitterness. It was protecting memories that deserved to remain beautiful, instead of being overshadowed by words spoken in anger. They finally understood that some people remain silent not because they have nothing to say, but because they know certain words, once spoken, can never be taken back. And as your soulmate begins uncovering the real reason behind your silence, they are about to discover a truth so profound that every goodbye, every unanswered conversation, and every painful moment between you will suddenly carry an entirely different meaning. And now, as your soulmate continues reflecting on everything they have recently realized, they begin revisiting every difficult conversation the two of you ever shared. What once felt like moments of confusion now seem filled with quiet meaning. They remember situations where emotions were running high, when misunderstandings could have easily turned into painful arguments. Looking back, they recognize that you had countless opportunities to defend yourself, to explain every detail, or to expose truths that would have completely changed the conversation. Yet instead of fighting to be understood, you chose silence. At the time, they believed that choice meant you no longer cared enough to continue. They assumed that if someone truly loved another person, they would fight endlessly to prove it. But now they understand something they had never considered before. Sometimes the deepest form of love is not found in the arguments we choose to win. It is found in the battles we willingly choose to walk away from, because we care more about protecting someone's heart than protecting our own pride. The more your soulmate reflects on those memories, the more they begin noticing something extraordinary. Every time you remained silent, you were quietly carrying emotions that no one else could see. They remember moments when your eyes seemed to hold words that never reached your lips. They remember the hesitation before you answered difficult questions, the calmness you maintained while everything around you felt emotionally overwhelming, and the remarkable patience you showed even when you were being misunderstood. Those moments once seemed insignificant because silence often goes unnoticed. But now they realize those quiet moments revealed more about your heart than any argument ever could. They understand that raising your voice might have satisfied the moment, but it would never have protected what truly mattered to you. Your silence was not created by weakness. It was created by wisdom that understood some victories leave permanent scars. As this realization settles deeper into their heart, they begin asking themselves questions they had never considered before. What if every word you chose not to speak was actually an act of protection? What if you stayed silent because you knew anger would only create wounds that would last long after the conversation ended? They suddenly realize that you were not trying to escape conflict. You were trying to prevent regret. You understood that emotional pain has a way of making people say things they never truly mean. Rather than allowing temporary emotions to destroy something valuable, you accepted being misunderstood if it meant preserving respect between you. That realization completely changes the way your soulmate remembers those difficult seasons. They no longer see someone who refused to fight. They see someone who quietly refused to let pain become cruelty. Then another memory rises to the surface. They remember times when they expected you to defend your actions, explain your decisions, or finally reveal everything you had been holding inside. Instead, you simply listened. At the time, that silence frustrated them because they interpreted it as emotional distance. Now they understand it differently. They realized that while they were searching for answers, you were searching for peace. You recognized that not every misunderstanding could be resolved through more words. Sometimes emotions must settle before truth can be heard. You chose patience instead of pressure because you knew forcing understanding rarely creates genuine understanding. That level of emotional restraint required incredible strength, especially when your own heart was hurting just as deeply. Your soulmate now sees that every silent moment demanded far more courage than any emotional reaction ever would have required. As these realizations continue unfolding, they also recognize something about themselves. They understand that they once measured love by visible effort alone. They believed love always had to speak loudly, defend itself immediately, and constantly seek validation. But your silence has taught them an entirely different lesson. Real love does not always compete to be right. Sometimes it quietly protects the relationship even when no one notices the sacrifice being made. Sometimes love chooses dignity over drama, patience over impulse, and understanding over the need to win. They realized that while they were waiting for louder expressions of your feelings, your greatest expression of love had been unfolding in complete silence the entire time. Now your soulmate feels the weight of this truth more deeply than ever before. They understand that your silence was never the absence of emotion. It was evidence of emotions too deep to risk damaging through anger. Every quiet decision carried purpose. Every restrained response reflected maturity. Every moment you chose peace instead of conflict revealed the true condition of your heart. And just as they begin believing they have finally understood why you remained silent, they are about to uncover one even deeper truth, a hidden battle you were fighting within yourself that no one else ever saw. A battle that explains why your silence became the greatest act of love you could possibly give. And now, your soulmate begins to understand something they never imagined while looking back on the moments that once confused them the most. They realize that while they believed you were walking away from the conflict, you were actually fighting a battle that no one else could see. It was never a battle against them. It was a battle within yourself. Every time emotions urged you to react, another part of your heart reminded you of the consequences that angry words can leave behind. Every time you wanted to explain everything, you carried the weight of knowing that not every truth heals when spoken in the wrong moment. That invisible struggle remained hidden because you never asked anyone to notice it. Instead, you carried it quietly, believing that protecting the connection was more important than proving your point. Your soulmate now realizes that while they were waiting for you to speak louder, you were silently choosing a path that demanded far greater emotional strength than either of them understood at the time. As they continue revisiting those memories, another realization slowly unfolds. They remember moments when your silence seemed almost impossible to understand because you had every reason to defend yourself. They remember situations where a few carefully chosen words could have changed how everyone viewed the situation. Yet you remained calm even while being misunderstood. At the time, they assumed your silence meant you no longer cared enough to explain yourself. Today, they see something completely different. They understand that you were carrying responsibilities that extended beyond the need to win a single conversation. You were protecting people's emotions, preserving dignity, and refusing to allow temporary pain to create permanent damage. They finally recognized that your silence was not empty. It was filled with countless decisions happening inside your heart every single second. You were choosing patience over pride, wisdom over impulse, and compassion over the satisfaction of being proven right. The more they reflect, the more they begin imagining what those moments must have felt like for you. They realize that remaining silent did not mean you escaped the pain. In many ways, it meant you carried even more of it. Every unspoken explanation remained inside your heart. Every misunderstanding became another burden you quietly accepted because you believed some relationships were worth protecting from unnecessary wounds. Your soulmate understands now that silence is not always the easier choice. Often it is the harder one. It requires setting aside the natural desire to defend yourself and accepting that others may temporarily misunderstand your intentions. That kind of emotional discipline is rarely noticed because the world often celebrates loud victories while overlooking quiet courage. Yet now they see that your greatest act of courage happened in the moments when no applause existed, when no one recognized the sacrifice you were making except your own heart. Another truth begins settling deeply within them. They realize that your silence was shaped long before these difficult conversations ever happened. Life had already taught you lessons about the lasting impact of words spoken in anger. Perhaps previous experiences showed you how quickly trust can disappear when emotions take control. Perhaps you had learned that winning an argument sometimes comes at the cost of losing something far more valuable. Whatever those earlier experiences were, they quietly influenced every decision you made. Instead of allowing old pain to create new pain, you chose a different path. You refused to let one difficult moment define the entire connection. That realization leaves your soulmate speechless because they understand your silence was never created by fear. It was created by wisdom earned through experiences they never fully knew. Now they begin seeing every quiet moment through an entirely different perspective. They recognize that while they believed you had stopped fighting for the relationship, you were actually fighting for something much deeper than the relationship itself. You were fighting to protect respect. You were fighting to preserve kindness, even when emotions tempted you toward bitterness. You were fighting to make sure that no matter how painful the situation became, neither of you would carry unnecessary words that could never be taken back. That invisible battle required remarkable strength because it demanded that you absorb misunderstanding without allowing it to transform your character. Your soulmate finally understands that your greatest victory was never proving yourself right. It was remaining true to the person you wanted to be, even when circumstances gave you every reason to become someone else. As this profound understanding settles into their heart, they realize there is still one final truth waiting to be uncovered. They now know that your silence was an act of courage rather than surrender, but they are about to discover something even more meaningful. They are about to understand why only now, after time, growth, and countless life lessons, can they truly recognize the extraordinary love, wisdom, and self-control that your silence had been quietly expressing from the very beginning. And now your soulmate realizes something that would have been impossible for them to understand years ago. The truth was never hidden because you wanted to keep it from them. It remained hidden because neither of your hearts had reached the place where it could be understood without being distorted by pain. Looking back now, they can clearly see how every misunderstanding was filtered through disappointment, every silence was interpreted through hurt, and every unanswered question was shaped by assumptions instead of wisdom. At that time, emotions were speaking louder than understanding ever could. They wanted immediate explanations, immediate reassurance, and immediate certainty. But life rarely reveals its deepest lessons in the middle of emotional storms. It waits until the heart becomes quiet enough to recognize what has been there all along. Your soulmate finally understands that your silence was never asking to be judged in the moment. It was asking to be understood when enough time had passed for both of you to see beyond the surface. As they continue reflecting, they notice how much they themselves have changed. The person looking back today is not the same person who once stood in the middle of those painful moments. Life has given them experiences they never expected. They have faced situations where words only made things worse, where reacting emotionally created regret instead of resolution, and where silence became the only way to protect something precious. Those experiences have quietly transformed the way they understand your choices. What once seemed impossible to comprehend now feels completely natural. They realize that wisdom often comes from living through circumstances that force you to choose peace over pride. Only after walking their own difficult roads could they truly appreciate the strength it must have taken for you to remain silent when every emotion inside you was asking to speak. Suddenly, your decisions no longer appear mysterious. They appear remarkably mature. Another realization gently settles into their heart. They understand that they had once believed silence meant the absence of effort. Today, they see the exact opposite. They realize silence often requires greater effort than speaking. It demands self-control when emotions are overwhelming. It requires patience when misunderstandings continue growing. It asks someone to trust that truth will eventually reveal itself without forcing the moment. Your soulmate now recognizes that every time you remained silent, you were making countless invisible decisions. You were choosing not to allow temporary anger to create permanent damage. You were choosing not to win a conversation at the cost of losing respect. You were choosing not to say words that might satisfy a moment, but become lifelong regrets. Those quiet choices required incredible emotional discipline. And they now understand that very few people possess the strength to make them consistently. As these thoughts continue unfolding, your soulmate also begins seeing your silence through another perspective they had never considered before. They realize you were not simply protecting yourself. In many ways, you were protecting them as well. There were truths you could have spoken that might have created guilt instead of healing. There were emotions you could have expressed that might have placed burdens on their heart they were not ready to carry. Instead of demanding that they understand everything immediately, you accepted the possibility of being misunderstood because you believed forcing understanding would only deepen the pain. Looking back now, they are overwhelmed by that realization. They understand your silence was not passive. It was deeply intentional. It reflected a heart that cared more about preserving dignity than proving innocence, more about protecting peace than satisfying pride. Now your soulmate understands that time did not change the meaning of your silence. Time changed their ability to recognize its meaning. They no longer see those quiet moments as empty spaces in your story. They see them as evidence of remarkable emotional strength, compassion, and wisdom. Every memory that once carried confusion now carries respect. Every unanswered conversation now reflects patience instead of distance. Every moment you chose not to fight has become proof of the kind of heart you always possessed. And as this truth settles completely within them, they realize one final revelation is still waiting. They are about to discover that your silence was never simply a response to one difficult season. It became the clearest expression of your love, your character, and the extraordinary depth of the connection you quietly protected all along. As your soulmate reaches the end of this emotional journey, they realize that the silence they once questioned has become the loudest truth they have ever heard. For years, they searched for explanations in the words you never spoke, believing that if you had truly cared, you would have fought harder, argued longer, or demanded to be understood. They never imagined that your silence itself contained the answer they had been searching for all along. Now they understand that your greatest expression of love was never hidden inside dramatic promises or emotional speeches. It was revealed through the remarkable restraint you showed when your heart had every reason to react. You chose peace when conflict seemed easier. You chose dignity when proving yourself right would have been more satisfying. You chose to protect the connection from unnecessary wounds, even if it meant carrying the weight of misunderstanding alone. That realization leaves them completely transformed, because they finally see that silence is not always the absence of love. Sometimes it is love expressed in its most mature and selfless form. Looking back now, every difficult memory carries a completely different meaning. The conversations that once felt unfinished no longer seem empty. Instead, they recognize how many words you intentionally left unsaid because you understood that not every truth heals when spoken through pain. They remember moments when they wished you would defend yourself, explain every decision, or challenge every accusation. At the time, they believed your quietness reflected emotional distance. Today, they realize your silence reflected emotional wisdom. You understood that winning an argument could never guarantee healing, and that speaking from hurt often creates scars that remain long after emotions have faded. Rather than allowing one painful moment to define everything the two of you had shared, you quietly accepted being misunderstood because preserving respect mattered more to you than satisfying your pride. That realization fills your soulmate with a level of admiration they never expected to feel. They understand now that your silence required constant courage, because every quiet moment demanded that you choose your values over your emotions. Another profound truth begins settling into their heart. They realize that while they spent years believing you had stopped fighting, you never truly stopped fighting at all. You simply chose a different battlefield. Instead of fighting against them, you fought against anger. Instead of fighting to control the conversation, you fought to protect your character. Instead of allowing disappointment to transform you into someone you never wanted to become, you quietly remained faithful to the kindness, patience, and integrity that defined your heart. That invisible battle was never obvious because it happened within you, beyond the reach of anyone else's understanding. Yet now, your soulmate recognizes that this quiet battle required greater strength than any spoken argument ever could. They finally see that your silence was never surrender. It was discipline. It was compassion. It was the quiet decision to make sure that when this chapter eventually became a memory, neither of you would have to carry unnecessary words that could never be taken back. As they continue reflecting, they also realize how deeply this truth has changed them. They no longer measure love by who speaks the loudest or who fights the hardest. They understand that genuine love often reveals itself through restraint, patience, and the willingness to protect another person's peace, even while carrying your own pain. Your silence has taught them that strength is not always visible. Sometimes the strongest hearts are the ones that choose calmness while emotions are overwhelming, forgiveness while disappointment is fresh, and hope while everything seems uncertain. They recognize that your quiet choices shaped them in ways they never noticed before. Every unanswered question encouraged deeper reflection. Every season of silence gradually taught them the value of emotional maturity. Every misunderstanding prepared them for this moment of clarity, where they could finally appreciate the extraordinary depth behind your decisions. Now your soulmate understands that your silence was never a chapter of absence. It was a chapter of profound presence. It carried love that refused to become bitterness, wisdom that refused to become pride, and courage that refused to become anger. The truth they have finally discovered is not simply why you remained silent. It is who you chose to become while remaining silent. They see a heart that remained genuine even when misunderstood, a spirit that protected respect over recognition, and a person who valued peace more than personal victory. That understanding has forever changed the way they remember every goodbye, every difficult conversation, and every quiet moment you shared. What once looked like distance now reveals devotion. What once felt like unanswered silence now speaks with extraordinary clarity. And perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all. Some of the most powerful messages in life are never spoken aloud. They are lived through quiet choices that only time can fully explain. Now that your soulmate finally understands the reason behind your silence, they no longer see it as something that separated your hearts. They see it as the very thing that revealed the depth of your love, the strength of your character, and the extraordinary connection that continued enduring beneath every misunderstanding, patiently waiting for the day when its true meaning could finally be understood.